Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TCG Folk. This week I talked to Gail Rosenblum, former Star Tribune columnist and the founder of Man Plans, God Laughs Entertainment. We talk about what led her to start her new nonprofit, the inspiration she found from the young adult novel Milkweed, and the changing nature of journalism on this week's Who the Folk podcast. But before we hear from Gail, technically it is still winter out there, so check out the TCG Folk merch store with new designs and new colors of hats and sweatshirts that help you stay warm and help support TCG Folk and our mission at the same time. Check it out at tcgfolk.com/store. Gail Rosenblum, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you for joining me.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
I am so happy to talk to you. You are longtime Twin Cities face in the media. Like people, longtime Star Tribune columnist, journalism background, which obviously hits very close to my heart.
Right.
But I want to talk sort of the current and go back through the past a bit. You're the founder of the nonprofit Man Plans, God Laughs Entertainment, MPGL.
Right. Yes.
Tell me about what MPGL is and what was the genesis of it?
Yeah. So first, MPGL, Man Plans, God Laughs, was my parents' favorite saying. Still say it.
It's a phenomenal saying.
We still say it all the time. My brothers and I, in text chains, we always say it. We love it. And so when I was coming up with the name for the nonprofit, that's how it came about. So if I could answer your question by going back a bit,
by all means,
which is we're gonna step back a bit to about 12 years ago. I fell in love with a young adult novel called Milkweed, and this I promise you I will be answering your question, but I'm going to try to give you the Cliff's Notes version of how we got here today. I fell in love with this novel called Milkweed, written by Jerry Spinelli, who is a very well-known young adult author. He wrote Stargirl, which was made into a movie by Disney.
Oh, really fun movie.
Maniac McGee. He's very well-known, very beloved, and is continuing to write. But anyway, I fell in love with Milkweed because it was the story of a mysterious little boy who finds his way into the Warsaw Ghetto in the years leading up to the Holocaust. And we don't believe he's Jewish. We believe that he is Roma. And the story was so compelling to me as a Jewish mother and, as a Jew and all of this. So I read the book and I thought, gosh, this would make an amazing movie. And so, how hard could it be to make a movie? This is an easy thing. So I'm buying all these Sid Field books on how to be a producer. I mean, I was so corny, and anyway, a very long story short, I optioned the novel, which simply means that I was given permission legally to start working on making it into a movie. And my daughter Sydney, created a website for me, milkweedthemovie.com, just to let people know we were going to that I was attempting to make a movie out of this great novel. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I start getting emails from middle school teachers all over the country. So I hadn't expected that. And the middle school teachers tell me, and this is on and on, continues to this day, when is this movie going to be ready for use in our classrooms? We love teaching this book. This is our favorite book to teach about the Holocaust, and not just about the Holocaust, but about empathy, about upstander behavior, about courage, et cetera, et cetera. So I was stunned by that. I had not seen it coming, right? And I immediately started thinking about a different model to make this film. So originally it was going to be financed, a for-profit kind of venture, which is very, very treacherous and difficult, nearly impossible. And I talked to a lot of people, and they said, let's turn this whole thing into a nonprofit. Because if you turn it into a nonprofit, you can provide teaching materials to teachers for free, because you'll go to foundations, you'll go to donors, that sort of thing.
Sure, absolutely.
So I thought, wow, I've never done this. I don't know how to do this. I got a fiscal sponsor. We created the nonprofit. That's where MPGL, Man Plans, God Laughs, came from, the name. And so kind of back to the present, I hired some wonderful curriculum developers who wrote some amazing lesson plans around Milkweed, the novel. And as of this week, we are in 42 states with our curriculum and 5 provinces in Canada. And so I have hired a program manager to run the educational piece so that I can raise money to create the film, which will also be offered to teachers for free. And they are clamoring for it. So we have, so the film, we do now have our screenplay written.
Okay.
We have our team in place. It is going to be animated. We decided that the topic it's a very difficult subject matter, as you can imagine. And so I have a team of wonderful animators who are right now getting ready to start the storyboarding process, which is sort of the creative vision for every minute of animation.
I mean,
that's a lot.
It's a lot.
Sorry, that's a lot.
No. Don't apologize. I love the idea that you sort of created the nonprofit, the entertainment company, as a response to this idea that you had years earlier.
Yes, and I didn't see it coming, but basically MPGL, Milkweed the movie will be under the umbrella of MPGL. So after we produce Milkweed, I will bring in other educational films that I can make along with teaching lessons that will talk about empathy, upstander behavior, etc. And I'm sure there are many, many out there. I've got a few sort of, in my kind of my back pocket for the future when we're ready to move to the next project. But the idea of this is an educational nonprofit, and we are trying to teach kids about how to be good human beings. And a Holocaust film is, a really good way to get the conversations going about how to be a good human being and how to be a really not good human being. And the focus on this one is middle school, nothing younger than middle school, because it's just, as I said, a tough topic.
And middle school's it's a difficult age anyway, having a child just get
that's right.
out of that age group, and now in high school. But it's so important that the lessons and sort of the roots of what you're trying to get at with the movie are planted at that age.
That's right,
because it is so pivotal.
And
Pivotal.
It is, and they're also so you think about the 10, 11, 12-year-old, they have such huge hearts, they want to do right, they're so emotional, they're so passionate, and so it's a great time to have these discussions. But to be honest with you, when I first optioned the book and we started creating the materials around it, I was thinking we were going to offer this to high schoolers because I thought the topic was too difficult. But the teachers, every single teacher said to me, no, this is a middle school book. They are ready for this topic, and and I have just gotten a lot of feedback from schools around the country, and to see what the students are discussing. They are tying it to. It's interesting to see how they're tying it. They're of course talking about the Holocaust, but they're also tying it to current events. It opens up a lot of possibilities for them to talk about the world, the bigger world.
And I can't speak for other states, but I know at least within Minnesota, I know how difficult it is to effectively be able to teach things like this when you are so often wedded to a very specific curriculum or mode or way of teaching certain topics that I'm sure school districts don't want you straying too far from. So it's interesting to see how other states maybe approach this topic also, but what kind of avenues it opens for you as well.
Well, and I don't know if you're aware, but we did just pass in the legislature, the Minnesota legislature has just mandated Holocaust and other genocide education beginning in about 2026. That has been very helpful to us because what we can tell people, we can tell teachers, listen, we have this curriculum, other teachers are using it around the country, it's tested, it's loved, and it's free. And so interestingly, in just the last few weeks, we have our number of classrooms in Minnesota has just soared. So we have more classrooms in Minnesota than any other state in the country, which wasn't true just a few months ago. Because of that, I think people are reaching out to us and they're looking for help. And gosh, teachers are so exhausted and they're so overworked and they don't have time. And so what we're trying to say is we've got this for you. We've got it, and it's created by teachers for teachers, and we're getting a lot of great feedback on it.
I mean, there are a lot of jobs that I would never want to do. Rabbi is one of them. Middle school teacher, though, might be on top of that list. So I think any help that they could be given is huge.
Yeah.
It's crucial. So where do you find the curriculum? I mean, you're a journalist.
Yeah.
You're not an expert in this area.
I am not. Boy, did I. My greatest gift to this project was getting out of the way. Let me just tell you, I have been stepping out of the way as sort of a superpower throughout this whole thing. So I hired Dr. Ellen Kennedy, who is founder of World Without Genocide. She created some wonderful teaching lessons, including a play, a readers' theater play where students can play the roles of real upstanders in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And then K.K. Neiman, who was a social studies teacher at Blake and is now with another nonprofit, created all hundreds of lessons around empathy to help teachers get into that discussion. So I think the beauty of the curriculum is that teachers can go online to Google Docs and find things, download whatever is appropriate to them. They can work on it for a day or 3 weeks or whatever they need, and we provide the books to them. So we give them everything, and that's why I keep running around talking to funders, as you know, because you have to do the same thing.
Fortunately, I have an executive director and a development person who does that, but
lucky you.
Yes, I'm very happy to be able to. Again, that's my superpower, is getting out of their way and letting them
lucky you.
do the thing.
Yeah.
So,
although I have to say, I mean, it is. Oh man, these people who are development directors, they are. I cherish them because they know what they're doing. I am learning as I go.
Sure.
Making a lot of mistakes, but I think people can see that I'm really trying to learn this world. I mean, I was a journalist for 45 years. I never knew how to do any of this. So yeah, I make mistakes, but I'm really proud of that we've been able to raise enough money to keep this going for a couple of years, and we'll keep it going into the future, we hope.
For sure. I mean, that's sort of I would think the challenge. You're not being a for-profit. You're trying to make this movie. You're not you're not selling copies of the movie.
Right.
You're making this movie so teachers can show their students for free.
That's right. That's right. And this is interesting too. The model of the nonprofit film is very unusual, but not completely unique. There are some other, I can't remember exactly the names of the films, but there's a few films out there that have followed this model. And I think this could be the future, because the truth is it is so difficult to make a film. Everybody knows that, unless you're already a big Universal Studios or whatever. Right. So I think this gives smaller stories an opportunity to be made if they can find the foundations that believe in their mission. And so if I'm able to prove that we can do this through the nonprofit model, then I would like to get out there and speak about this for other storytellers, because ultimately I am a storyteller, even though I'm doing it differently now. And I feel like these stories need to get out there, and maybe we can help others who have wonderful stories to tell, who are just hitting every brick wall. Maybe this is the way to do it.
And, I mean, you mentioned being a storyteller. It does all in a way. Mm-hmm. I mean, people may find it to be it's certainly not a straight line. It is a winding path, though. It is all part of the same, kind of the same genre of what you've always done, as being a storyteller, as a journalist. Yeah,
and this is a very emotional story, and I really tried in my columns and in my work to tell those emotional stories that move people. This is probably the biggest story I'll ever tell. I didn't write it. Jerry Spinelli wrote it, but I should also note that Jerry Spinelli is a donor to the project. He's such a gentleman and a scholar, and he's very supportive of us and very excited for us. He has met our art director in person, so that's been just sort of a lovely side note to this, is that the gentleman who wrote this is really rooting for us, which is great.
I mean, I would imagine it's just so hard. I mean, maybe even impossible to do what you're trying to do, to tell the story with this film, without having the author, the creator of the story, bought into it.
Yeah, and you do hear these nightmare stories. Like when I was growing up, I had a very close friend whose mom was a famous author, and her books were often made into these disastrous, B movies. They were just like these like slasher films. Yeah. And she would and sort of her philosophy was, well, they paid me. I don't, she sort of looked the other way, but I think she just was horrified by how sort of what would happen to her great novels, her young adult novels. They'd be turned into these slasher films, but this is something so different. We're closely following the book. So when we wrote the script, it follows very closely the novel itself, and all we've added is really that visual piece, which will be incredibly beautiful.
I mean, it can't be, books can't be can't go word for word.
It can't.
Otherwise,
It's visual.
it'd be a 15-hour long
No, that's
movie.
right.
So you gotta. I would think. I mean, I know nothing about screenwriting. My guess
Mm-hmm.
is it's just sort of extrapolating the key stuff and figuring out how to flesh out those details.
It's very screenwriting is surprising to me as a journalist. It's
Yeah.
very sparse, like
Yeah.
70 pages. Some pages have just a few words on them. It's really we'll be filling in with this gorgeous visual entity. But I'm always surprised if you see screenplays. Sometimes they're so sparse, and
Yeah.
everything that makes them robust and full is the director and the vision and the cinematography and all of that. But it's been we have probably rewritten this script 20, 30 times. It's finally at the place where I know it's ready.
Okay.
And Anita Sobel, our art director, who's based in Brooklyn, is starting to do sort of her point of view of where the camera will hit on every scene, and she's doing some of them in color. And if any of your listeners are interested in following us, which I hope they would do, on Facebook, our Milkweed the movie site, they can see the artwork she's creating, and it's gorgeous, gorgeous.
I think that's really cool that you're giving folks this kind of real-time look of what's going on, because I think so many times the inclination is to be, here's the movie, it's done.
Oh, yeah.
Or here's the
Oh, my
trailer,
gosh.
here's a
Here's the
trailer, here's
trailer,
a
and here's
teaser,
the movie,
and then
and
it's
that's
done.
it.
But you're willing to give like this real-time look of Anita's work to let people, I mean, I feel like it creates buy-in.
Thank you. I love that you said that. I hope that is true.
I hope that it is too. It sounds amazing.
The truth is that it's just taking me so long to make this film. I'm going to be one of those people say, sometimes I'm almost like afraid to admit they're like, oh, Gail, you're still making that movie? I'm like, yeah, I'm still making that movie. But I'll be one of those stories where it's like 20 years later, Gail Rosenblum finally got her movie out there. But I figure we're making progress. But I think that helps because it does build sort of a belief that we're actually doing it. And it helps me too. It boosts me. It boosts the morale of the team to see the progress we're making and to grow those who are following us. So it's been the most amazing adventure of my life. Journalism was easy compared to this.
Yeah.
And, I wish I had started it 20 years earlier when I had more brain cells. But it happens when it happens.
Right. No, for
Here we
sure.
are.
I mean, look, as a journalist, I'm sure you had stories that like you started, these like documents or files, things you started, come back to, you leave it, you come back to, you leave it, and 6 months, a year later. I mean, I've got a tab on my browser of a story that I started, interviews I did last summer, story I started writing in December, that maybe by March I'll get finished up. Not because it's not going to be a good story or not going to be fun, but just sometimes it's hard to just put the finishing touches on it.
Sometimes too, and I have had those experiences in my life as a writer, and I think sometimes you just need to be ready. And sometimes you're not. And I can give you a really quick example.
Please.
The best example of my life was when I was 29, my father died of cancer, and he died on Father's Day Eve, which was tough.
Yeah.
And so immediately after, since I was a writer, I wanted to process it, and I started writing an essay about him. And it was a mess. It was a disaster. And what I realized is I was too close to the grief to be able to do something compelling, right? So I waited, and so a year passed. And in Judaism, how important the year, right, the first year is, right? So on that level, I sort of took a beat. And when I finally got back to the essay, I was ready, and it was the right essay. And when it was published, it was the right essay. But if I had tried to, well, first of all, no one would have published it probably. But when I finally was ready, and I think sometimes you just have to step back, and then when you step forward again, you do it with new eyes. And that, to me, is the best example of it. And I think sometimes you're just not ready. I think sometimes people get too close to grief or sadness or anger or whatever, and then they try to process it. They should probably just keep that in your journal.
Yeah.
And then later on, when you've been able to step back, then think about what is the piece of it that you want to share with the world. That's
what I found that can often be the hardest part about being a journalist is like sometimes when news happens and when you have to write in the moment,
tough.
It like breaking news is usually my worst writing because you're just writing what is happening in the moment, and you don't have a lot of you don't have the time to process what's going on.
And I can tell you that for me was the scariest part of modern journalism when we started going to digital first, meaning get it fast, because there were so many errors made. I just am so panicked. And when I teach journalism students, they are being counseled to get it first. And I think that's so dangerous. Think about all the errors and the misinformation. And I had a friend who used to say, get it first, but first get it right. And that was really a good mantra. And it's almost impossible because people are hovering over you now, these young people. I told you that the newsroom is kind of empty, sadly, and so these poor young people, these young journalists, they're in their, who knows, they're on their own, they're trying to get it first, they're trying to get it fast. I worry for them. I have such respect for them that they choose to be journalists in this modern age, but I think the challenges on them are tremendous, and it makes me nervous for them.
Oh, there's no question. I mean, I've been doing this, feels like a long time to me anyway. But at a certain point in my first job out of college, our news editor was like, kick me out of the newsroom. Like, news doesn't happen in the newsroom.
That's what mine used to say.
Get out of here. News doesn't happen in the newsroom. Go talk to people.
That's good.
And so I did.
It's good advice.
It is good. It was great advice. It teaches you to get out and
talk to people.
Learn how to cultivate sources. Like, these things matter as a journalist, but it's also very different because I helped start the website for the first paper I worked for. My first job was the Detroit Jewish News in 1997 and didn't have a website. So, I was part of that very early stage. So it wasn't digital first. There was no digital.
Oh, that's right.
So, you and I mean, we are not of the same generation,
right.
but what we have in common is that neither of us learned how to be journalists in the digital age.
No, we didn't.
We didn't have to worry about getting something out on Twitter first.
That's right.
We had to worry about getting the article right, and then it goes in the paper, and that's when people see it the next morning.
Listen, I started on typewriters. Do you know what a typewriter is?
I do know what a typewriter is.
I started on typewriters.
Filled out my college applications in my mom's office on a typewriter.
Okay.
So I know what a typewriter is. I know what a typewriter is.
Oh my gosh, it was such a different world.
Yes.
And it was also a different world for the consumer, because the consumer would wake up in the morning and the paper would be on the stair, right? And you're outside, right? On your front, right? And then you'd, if there were breaking news, I'm putting that in quotes, you'd turn on the radio.
Yep.
And then at 5 and 6 and 10, you'd turn on the TV, right? There just weren't these kind of choices. And I do feel for the modern, no wonder everyone's so anxious and, neurotic. It's like the news is coming at us so fast and we cannot process it as human beings. So I don't know what's going to change, but something has to change because this is not a healthy way to consume the news. I think we just all need to turn it off a bit. And I'm not sure, I don't know how people are going to be able to do that.
I don't know either. I mean, and it's somebody who produces news and content.
Yeah.
I don't know how you turn. I don't turn my brain off.
Yeah.
I need to, but I don't know how you do it.
Well, the last 4 years that I was at the Star Tribune, and this was a deliberate choice of mine. I had been a columnist for 10 years, and I was so burnt out. I was so exhausted by the news cycle, and I thought, well, it's time. I'm done, And then they offered me this amazing job with this news section called Inspired, and what they were doing was experimenting with a standalone section that offered only solutions, good news, happiness, hope, just to see if anybody would like it. Well, let me tell you, people loved it. And what I would always say in that job as an editor, I did it for 4 years, and it was the best job of my journalism career, is this news is also true. This is as true as anything you're reading on the front page. The problem is the sort of man bites dog nature of journalism, right? Which is if it's terrible and a disaster, it's going to go on the front page and it's going to get a lot of coverage. Yeah. But your average reader doesn't understand that. The average reader picks up the paper and thinks this is happening everywhere instead of this is barely happening anywhere, which is why it's on the front page.
I mean, it's the old if it bleeds, it leads.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, it's a funny story because it reminds me of I had gotten when I used to cover Burnsville for Sunday newspapers.
Oh yeah, sure.
And I got invited to think it was a Rotary Club breakfast
Sure.
one morning. And so I drove down, was talking, asking questions, gave a little speech. And, I was much, much younger. I felt very out of my league, little imposter syndrome talking to this group. And somebody had asked me, they're like, very earnestly, and this is somebody of, either, I think somebody in politics, maybe who used to represent the area. It was like, when I grew up, the local weekly was like, the lead photo was like kids playing baseball or just sort of a fun neighborhood standalone picture. Why isn't that the case anymore? And I didn't have a good answer for him because, it was a free weekly, so it's not even about selling at that point. But I didn't have a great answer because I think we're just all starting to get very attuned to the fact of news has to be on the front page. Yeah. That's the above the fold front page.
Well,
big deal stuff has to be there.
Ills, disasters. Yeah. It's interesting because when I was a young parent, as you are, but I was also a journalist, I used to worry so much about my fellow young parents because they were afraid of all the wrong things. So, you can't walk down to the park by yourself and play because you'll get abducted. And so I kept writing sort of against the tide. I would say, listen, if you're worried for your kids, here's what you need to worry about. Make sure they're in the right car seat. Get their seatbelts on. Put on helmets. Don't let them drown in the pool. But no one wanted to hear it because they thought they were going to get shot at school. They're going to get kidnapped, right? Yeah. Do you know? Do you know how many kids get? Do you remember? You know how many kids actually stranger abduction? You know how many there are a year? 100 in the entire United States. 50 of them are returned. So for the 50 families, it's tragic. But compare that to kids who drown in pools, kids who aren't locked into their car seats. So I was always very frustrated with my own profession, and I always felt like I was swimming upstream. But that's why those pictures of those cute kids playing baseball aren't on the cover. It's because news editors who make the decisions aren't going to choose those photos.
That's right.
We have turned to this very difficult, negative, assumption that's the only thing people will be drawn to. And I think people are turning away now. I think people are shutting down.
Yeah. No, I think that's probably true. And I think that's I think we've probably been trending that way for a long time. And I don't know what the breaking point finally is or was or will be, when that finally happens. But I think we're probably, we've been sort of on that road for a while.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah. And actually, when you mention the suburban weeklies, I'm a big fan of those. So what I tell people when I speak in the community and people say, what can I do? I don't want to feel so anxious. I say go uber local. Go to the weeklies and the bi-weeklies because that's the real news of your world. Yep. What's going on with your neighbors, your community. This is where you can have an impact, right? And so I'm really a big fan. The Sun papers, I think those are the best thing we can do to sort of rebuild community, to understand where we really are at in terms of what we can do in our own communities to rebuild it. And, kind of let go a little bit of things you can't control because it's not good for your mental health. And, what's the point, really?
No, that's true. The thing that really impressed me most about your career as a journalist is that you spent so long as a columnist. Mm-hmm. That
did feel like a long time.
Well,
it was 10 years going on 100. Well, at the end, it felt like.
I'm sure it did. Oh. It's like column writing for me is the hardest thing to do. Mm-hmm. I really don't like doing it. How did you do that for so long?
Yeah,
That's
it is
so
hard. It is hard, and I think the hardest thing for me was you have to come down. You have to have an opinion on everything, and I find myself. It's sort of ironic that I was ever a columnist, to be honest with you, because I find myself. I live sort of in the gray zone, like but I'm always like, well, but what about? So I was probably not the most impactful columnist because I was always sort of trying to see both sides of things, which is not a good columnist comes down on a side, and so that was tricky for me. There were certain things that I was able to come down on a side. But I think I ended up just sort of being more of a human, nature columnist, just writing about people, relationships. So I became a little bit of a different, less traditional columnist, like in Chicago, which is where the famous columnist in Chicago. I decided if I was going to be authentic, I had to kind of write the kind of columns that made sense to me, and it was fine. I did more people columns, personal interest kind of things, and I think it worked out. But I think most columnists, it is an exhausting job, and so I don't know how long I don't know what the average is, but 10 years felt like a long time. And also, it's time to give another voice to someone else, right? You got to step out, make room for someone else, which I was happy to do.
Were you ready to be done with it by the time? It sounds like you were ready when you decided to walk away from that.
I was more than ready, and if I hadn't gotten this opportunity to take over the Inspired section for 4 years, I probably would have retired, 4 or 5 years earlier than I did. So it gave me back some years as a newspaper columnist. I mean, a newspaper reporter, and I loved that I was able to stay with it a little longer. I was very, very proud to be at the Star Tribune. I wish them well. I think they have a great new publisher. It's a miracle today that they're doing as well as they are, printing every single day of the week. It's not something to take for granted anymore.
It's really not. I mean, local news is taking its hits nationwide. I mean,
papers closing, going to 2 days a week.
Yeah,
oof, it's tough to watch.
The private equity,
I know.
Folks buying them out. Like it's a tough gig.
Yeah.
It's a tough business to be in.
Yeah, we've been very lucky in Minnesota. I feel like I worked as a journalist in the heyday of newspapers.
You did.
I really did, starting in the 70s all the way up until very recently. I just look back on it and like, wow, were we the lucky ones? We really were. What a great way to make a living. Tell people stories.
And you watch that's what it is. That's what it is at its heart, right? Anyway, it's storytelling.
It is storytelling.
It's telling the stories of what happens, people's, places, things. Like that's what journalism is.
That's right. No, it
or
is.
At least should be.
Yeah. No, I feel very lucky that I was able to do that for as long as I did it. And it's funny because when I was in high school and college, I didn't even really know about a journalism career. I just knew I loved to write. I was always a strong writer. And what happened was, you mentioned you wanted to be a sports writer.
Yeah.
This is so funny because this is the last thing anyone would expect of me. But my friend was the editor of the University of New Mexico Daily Lobo, which was the the newspaper. And she said, come write for me. And I was like, okay. She said, I'll give you a byline, put your name in there, and $25 a story, which seemed like so much money. And she assigned me to cover sports, women's sports. So how about that? So my first job was as a sports writer, which is so funny to my kids because I'm the last person. I've never played an organized sport in my life. I'm like, hey, guess what my first job was? So it was, it's a source of amusement to my children. But that's how I started.
$25 an article is.
How about that?
Believe what I got paid at the Lansing State Journal in.
Seemed like a lot of money.
That was 1994. They were paying me that.
No, this is a lot.
That was not a lot of money.
This is a lot before that. Yeah.
Yes, it was not a lot of money at the time.
Sorry about
again,
that.
it's the experience though.
Yeah.
It's you get to get out and cover.
And you see your name. My gosh, that's the most exciting thing.
Take my quarters to the paper box the next morning.
Oh, right. Take a few.
Yeah.
Pull a few out of there.
I don't know what you're talking about. I would never do that.
No, I know. I know you wouldn't.
How could you suggest that?
I know. How would I? That's terrible.
Well, I am just so impressed, and just it's so cool that you're able to take this sort of career in storytelling and not leave it behind at all. It's just a transition from one thing to the next.
It really
it's so
is.
fun.
Thank you. I do feel like this is the continuation of great storytelling. I mean, this is a great story. It's a very beautiful story. If people haven't read Milkweed, it's a beautiful story and sadly timely. Again, we didn't get into that. We'll probably avoid that discussion.
Okay too,
but it's a story about what happens when we stop seeing other people as human beings, and it's great fodder for young people to have very important discussions. So as a mother and grandmother, and I feel like, this is when you get to a certain point in your life, when you retire, you sort of want to give back. And so there's a great satisfaction for me in knowing that this nonprofit is in some way providing a little bit of healing. Because you get to my age, it's like, well, what else do I need to do? I want to do something that's helpful to the world. And so it has provided that opportunity to me as well.
That's great. I mean, you could also just enjoy retirement.
I could, but I couldn't.
I kind of have gotten that sense about you. That's not your thing.
I need a new word, too. It's like people say, how's retirement? I'm like, I have no idea. Like, ask me in 10 years. I don't know. I got to get this movie made. Ask me in 10 years. God, I hope I've made the movie in 10 years. Oy.
Knock on wood. There will be a movie to watch.
Don't invite me back in 10 years to say, how's that movie going? Let's hope by then we're talking about something else.
I hope we are. I am certain we will be.
Thank you.
I am certain we will be. Gail, last couple questions we always end on, though, before we let you go. First, what is your favorite Jewish holiday?
Oh, my gosh. My favorite Jewish holiday. Well, I love Passover because I always host, and I love every Jewish holiday, but I would say Passover because I host, and many of my non-Jewish friends who are so genuinely interested and respectful come. So we have a big table full of all sorts of us.
That's awesome.
So I love that.
That's such a fun holiday.
I love it.
People say Passover a lot, but it's for everybody's the why.
What a
for
great
everybody.
story.
It is a great story, but everybody's why is so different, and it's so fun.
Mine is just the people at the table every year. They're so touched by it, and it makes me touched. And when I tell the story, I feel touched because they're so interested.
Yeah,
Thank you for
really
asking
fun.
that.
And what's your favorite Jewish food?
Oh, my gosh. I have to limit it? My favorant Jewish food?
The number of loopholes people have found to cram a bunch of them into this answer is impressive.
I'm going to say, basic. Just a really good bagel with lox and cream cheese and schmear. It's just, and if I'm in New York, and I was recently, I got a really good bagel with the schmear and lox and, capers. And to me, that's all I need.
That works every time.
Does that count?
100% that counts. Gail Rosenblum.
Thank you. This was fun.
This has been amazing. Thank you for coming in. I appreciate it. And best of luck with Milkweed.
Thank you.
And everything else you got going.
Thank you. So nice to be here.
The Who the Folk podcast is a part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network and a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.